introduce to you William Paul Young.
It's always interesting to me which version of the bio is still out there, you know. Internationally renowned speaker, that's because I'm born in Canada. Yeah, it's so funny. I had a thyroid issue a couple of years ago, and my pharmacist had to get extra of the levothyroxine that you have to do to replace whatever, and she said, where are you going? And I was telling her on this road trip, which is a 20-day road trip, I'm going to Toronto. She said, oh good, I didn't lie to the health insurance. So she said, we told them you were going out of the country. And when we lived in a little town outside of Portland called Boring, Oregon. That's the name of the town, Boring, Oregon. And after I wrote the shack, we actually now live in Oregon City, but after I wrote the shack, we moved to Happy Valley. By the way, there's one town in between Boring and Happy Valley. If you want to go from Boring, Oregon to Happy Valley, guess what you have to go through? There's one little town in between. Damascus. There's a sermon in there somewhere, I just know it. I worked for East Hill Church for 2.5 years. It's the only time I ever worked for like a institutional religious organization. And long enough to meet Kim, which was worth the price of admission. And I ran into a North Dakota, Minnesota girl who has a huge, humongous salt-of-the-earth family. You know, people that are genetically enhanced to all talk loudly at the same time and understand each other. I come from a religious, evangelical family. We hide everything. We lie about most stuff. And when we get together, we have to have an order of service, you know. So different, very different. My dad was an old-time preacher. One of those guys that if you asked him to pray, he got possessed. He had a different voice. First time Kim ever heard him at a family event pray, she burst out laughing, thinking he was joking. I wrote the shack because I wanted, well, here's what happened. I've been a writer my whole life, but like anybody is. You know, you write poetry or songs and you give it to your friends and family, and they love it because it doesn't matter how bad it is, they love you. So it's just like, yeah, you do this little writing stuff, and I've done that my whole life. Writing for me as I was growing up was a way to try to get outside of my world because it was so painful on a lot of different levels. Reading was my way to get into somebody else's world so I could get out of that and what the daily activity was. So I grew up as a missionary kid in the highlands of New Guinea, so we didn't have a lot of technology. So books became my way. And that's how I learned kind of over the years to write. So Kim, she likes my writing, and so she had been saying for a few years, you know, someday, as a gift for our children, would you just put in one place how you think, because you think outside the box. And so I didn't feel whole enough or healthy enough as a human being until the year I was turning 50. I mean, it's kind of like a big deal. Write to your children and put in one place how you think. You know, and I love story, and this is why I like what these guys are doing, particularly, because to me, every human being is a story. We're dealing with eternal beings, you know, and story, people's story is the holy ground in which you are invited. When you get to listen to these stories and you get to be in that space, it's holy ground. I tell people I think that's why we're born barefaced, because that's where we were intended to be. And every human being is a story. I mean, we could spend, a month to begin with just basically hearing some of your stories, and they would be amazing. And so I love story. I think we have an affinity for story, and I like fiction because it doesn't tell someone what to think, right? Fiction, for me, if it's good fiction, not propaganda fiction, but if it's good fiction, it actually creates more space than it uses up. And so people get to hear for themselves something, and you trust them. You trust that there is a God who is working inside the details of their life, a God who is good, to help them understand the story of who they are. And I love that. So I like story. So when I was thinking, all right, so what do I write to my kids? How do I put in one place how I think? And by the way, I'm going to tell you a story or two, and then we'll do Q&R. I do Q&R because I'm Canadian. If I was just an American, I would do Q&A. We're just not that smart. And so we do questions and responses. You know, because we don't want to start a war anywhere. We just we're basically surviving the cold. And so, what do you do? So I wanted to write something for my kids that would engage them, and story is a good way to do it. And I wanted to say to them, look, let me through story tell you about the God I've come to know, not the one I grew up with. Right? And so I use different imagery that surprised some people, like my mom. And seriously, when Papa God, when God the Father came through the door, if you haven't read it, or if you don't know about this, I don't know where you've been, but God the Father is a large black African American woman, right? And when Papa came through the door for the first time, my mom, who really tried to read the book because her son wrote this thing, right? She shut it, and she picked up the phone and called my sister, Debbie, and quote, "Your brother is a heretic," right? She felt that way. It's a whole wild story, which I will not go into, how she got past it, but she's way past it. And it's actually one of those beautiful crafting things that you see how God weaves inside God's sense of humor. And it's beautiful. So I'm trying to write a story. I'm working 3 jobs. I'm on the train. I'm cleaning toilets. I'm shipping and receiving. I'm doing hotel night clerk. We're living in a little rental house. Kim gets a job at the high school bakery 2 blocks away. And we have nothing. But that's why I wrote The Shack, because I wanted to give my kids something for Christmas. And I wanted to put it in one place how I think. And later, a couple of years later, when the book actually was put in print, instead of the 15 copies at Office Depot, what I did, 15 with a little plastic, because I never intended this book to be published. Are you kidding? I don't know anything about publishing at the time. And so Kim says to me after the book gets printed, she says, "No, when I asked you to do this, I was thinking like 4 to 6 pages." One of the most beautiful things that has happened because of this book, and you need to understand, I have no idea what I'm doing, and I like that. I really like that. If I knew what I was doing, I'd be terrified. And I don't. My kids, my girls particularly, have said, "Dad, you have so ruined the idea of celebrity for us." Well, suddenly I am one of those. I'm supposed to know everything. It's like, what? This is God's sense of humor inside my story. And one of the most beautiful things is that I get to be inside people's holy ground. I get asked quite a bit, and it would probably come up in the question and response time if I didn't say this, and that is, I was with a psychiatrist, a child psychiatrist, just a couple days ago, and he says, "I have one question for you. Have you received any negative feedback, pushback, from anybody in the helping fields, like AA or hospice or psychiatry or psychology, regardless of their religious frame of reference? Have you received any pushback?" And I told him, not one, not a single one, right? All the pushback that I get come from my people. Evangelical fundamentalists, that's my people. So be careful how you talk about them. I come from a background where we don't have to read anything to be an expert in it. Even the Bible, right? So, when I was growing up, it was about being right. As long as you could be right in a strong enough way, you didn't have to actually have a conversation. And but those are my people. So the people that have pushed back, and people ask me all the time, how do you deal with the negative stuff? And I want to tell you that, because it tells you a little bit about me. I like it. I like it because an angry person is an engaged person. They actually care about it. Right? So here's where the wars happen. When that person's coming at me and they're mad about whatever it is, if I think that they're coming to tell me about me, we're going to have a war. But I'm old enough, and I've been around enough, and I've gone through enough, and I know myself well enough, and I know they don't know me better than I do. So they're not coming here to tell me about me. They're coming to tell me in the only way they know how about what matters to them. Right? And they're bringing me what they got. In that moment, even if they're angry, they're bringing me what they have in that moment. And if I can be present, and if I can be listening, and I'm not at risk, a conversation can happen. Relationship changes the rules. Anybody that's gone through something with their kids, you know, because of your love for them, suddenly your ideology is not going to work. If that becomes a point of difference. And relationship and your love for them will change the rules. And it's a good thing. Because relationship is, to me, where the depth of the character and nature of God is. I'm going to tell you a couple quick stories, and then we'll do Q&A. I was getting on a flight from Asheville, North Carolina to Atlanta. And my bag actually made it, not like today. I had my clothes 10 minutes to 6 because they kind of stayed in Atlanta for a while, seeing the sights or whatever they were doing there. I'm not sure. And but I'm getting on this flight, and you know, I'm evangelical fundamental. I've been inside a relationship with Jesus my entire life, missionary kid, preacher's kid, firstborn, right? And so over the years, I've gotten to have a sense of the voice of the Holy Spirit, that nudge that's on the inside. And I've never heard God speak audibly, but I have friends who have, but I never have. But I hear it, I know the nudge when it happens. And it's kind of fun. You get to participate in something and you don't know what's going to happen. And so I'm getting on this flight, and I got a nudge. I just like, that girl who's like 4 people ahead of me, I'm going to be sitting with her. I just knew it. Right? So I'm thinking like, oh, that's interesting. Because, you know, she's walking ahead of me, so I don't have any clue. But sure enough, she stops on row 4, and I'm on the window. And I'm 4 people back, so I kind of say, excuse me, I'm on the window. Is it okay if I get in first? Right? So she's great. She steps back, and I had 1 copy of the Shack with me at the time. And I gotten it out because I'm thinking, oh, this has probably got to do with the Shack. Because a lot of things have to do with the Shack, trust me. You know, around in my world. And as I'm stepping through, my foot catches her purse, the loop in it, and man, I go down. I mean, I just like, and I go down with the book right in her face. You know, not on purpose, really, not on purpose. I'm just like, bam, on the ground, and with a book like this, and you know, everybody's apologizing and making sure there's no lawsuit or anything. You know. So, but I settle in and put the book in the seat back pocket. She settles in. This is a 23-minute flight. We're boarding. And she turns to me and she says, "You're not actually going to read that book, are you?" What, do you love it? I said, well, I read it. Have you? She said, oh, I read it about a year ago, didn't like it. Really? What did you like about it? Right? And it was like I opened a machine gun nest. I mean, it violates the principles of God, it's, you know, on and on and on. And at one point she says, and I didn't like the portrayal of the Trinity. And that was just one of those things in that line. And I kind of latched onto that, and I waited until she had to take a breath. And I said, can I ask you a question? What was it about the Trinity that you didn't like? And she thinks for a second, she says, I don't remember, but bam, she's after it again, right? So she is just like, and now, if I was a third party listening to this conversation, I would have thought, she must know the author because she is getting kind of personal, right? Now, that doesn't bother me a bit. So she is like after it. And finally, when she took a breath, I said, can I ask you another question? Do you know the author? Because just sitting outside the conversation, I was sure that, it's like she talked like she did. So I'm thinking, I wonder how much she knows about me. And so I said, do you happen to know the author? She said, oh, no, but. And then, you know those little cartoon things where you have that little light bulb? Right? I swear I could see it. And it just flickered. Just a tiny, tiny bit. And she looks kind of sideways at me. And she says, you're not the author, are you? I said, yeah. She says, no, you're not. I said, yes, I am. No, you're not. Right? I had to show her my driver's license, my Delta Sky Miles card, and 2 credit cards before. Now, what's she supposed to do, right? Because she is so far in over her head at this point. So what's she supposed to do? So she does something that I recognize. She puts her head back and she goes, this is such a God thing. I don't know what that means in this situation. I'm thinking, so does she think now that she's going to set me right? And, I'm thinking like, what does that even mean? You have to understand, I love these situations. I'm kind of laughing about it inside, but I don't want to be disrespectful. And I said, look, I don't care what you think about the book. I really don't. Tell me how you ended up on this flight sitting next to me. What's your story? Right? And this is what Tom and Michael do. They get inside people's stories, and people are dying to be heard. They are dying to be heard. So I said, what's your story? And she starts telling me how a year before this, but 11 before she had read The Shack, year and a half, her life was, it was devastated for a whole lot of different reasons. And she was just tumbling through addiction and into absolute despair. She was at the bottom. And she had an encounter with Jesus that massively changed her world. And do you understand this? Because of that, it yanked her out of the slough of despondency. But she was hanging on for dear life and terrified that something would take it away from her. She was desperate, right? So she is working as hard as she can to hold on to this because it saved her life. I have a friend, Ron Graves, and he played semi-professional rugby for 25 years and drove toxic waste tankers. So he's a poet, as you would imagine. And I met him because of The Shack. He's become one of my best friends. And Ron has this little thing that he says to people. He says, in a conversation, he will say to them, look, I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything. But everything that is precious to you right now, I don't want it to be less precious by the time we're finished our conversation. I want everything that is precious to you now to be precious to you when we're done our conversation. Isn't that beautiful? Well, all of us are bringing stuff, and things are precious to us. And so she is telling me what's precious to her, and she's holding on to this. And I said, you know what? Let me tell you something. I love the zeal you have and how much you're hanging on here. But if I was God sitting right next to you, I think I know what he would say to you. And she said, what? And I put my hand on her shoulder and I said, relax. And tears just come running down her face, right? Because she is hanging on for dear life. And so we're on a 23-minute flight. Right? We're having this whole interaction. And when we land, and she hugs me like I'm her oldest friend. And she says, I'll read it again. I said, I don't care. That wasn't the point. God doesn't need another book, right? He doesn't need a movie, he doesn't need a song, he doesn't need... We're invited to participate all the time. And out of what we bring to the table and what others bring to the table, we watch grace and beauty emerge inside really hard things, very difficult things. And about 15 minutes later, I was, Atlanta airport. I'm trying to go from one state to the other, somewhere in the subterranean abyss. And I'm in the train, and it opens up, and she walks on. But she was trying to get between something and something else, the gate changed or whatever. She goes, Paul! And I'm just thinking, look what happened inside that conversation, because I wasn't at risk. I don't have an identity because I wrote a book. My identity was in place before I wrote a book. My significance doesn't come from a book. But see, that took a long time. I didn't know those things until I was like 50 years old. I came with a huge amount of baggage. And it took me basically 50 years to get to zero. You know? But the book is a beautiful, wonderful God sense of humor. The first 15 copies I made at Office Depot did everything I ever wanted that book to do. Everything. You know, you give a book to your kids for Christmas, it's like, thanks, Dad. We'll get right on that. So it took them a while, but they've all read it and they love it. And it hit each of them different because we're all different human beings. And even as we move, we hear things differently, and it's a beautiful thing. To be present inside that space is holy ground. To learn how to be a listener inside that holy space and holy ground, that is participation at the deepest level. A lot of times, God doesn't say anything. He just is with us. And sometimes, you know, the things we face, there aren't any answers for them. They're senseless and they're wrong. We're not created for death or sickness or deterioration. You know, we experience it because of the brokenness of this humanity. But it wasn't what we were intended for. That's why we fight it. We were intended for life. And part of presence and part of listening is life. And that's what we get to share with each other. So, we got somebody that's got a microphone, and we'll have a time. I don't know, he's got the timer, so I'll try not to be overly verbose, but I can go down rabbit trails, and just warn you. So if you've got any questions, it could be about Shack or Crossroads, or something that I said, or something that you've heard, or a story you want me to tell. I don't know, doesn't matter. Thank you for that. Oh, there's one right there.
The microphone is not working.
So I will repeat it regardless of even if you heard it or not. So go ahead, brother.
So what would be a simple question that you would ask somebody to get them to tell a story?
Ooh, a simple question that I would ask somebody to get them to tell the story. And this is part of the beauty of this. It took, because of the damage in my childhood and stuff, I never was a child. A writer from Nashville put it the best when she read The Shack. She sent us an email and she said, I don't even know who you are or what your history is, but my sense is that Missy represents something murdered in you as a child, probably your innocence, which is true. And Mackenzie is using an adult trying to deal with it. So coming to the place in my life where I finally become a child, and I love this living inside the grace of one day. I love that I don't have to figure out an agenda. And I tell God every day, please, unless you think it's absolutely necessary, don't tell me what you're doing. Okay? I'm a missionary kid, preacher's kid. I can turn it into an agenda and a 5-year plan. Just give me a chance. Right? And I don't like living that way. Are we pointing? Okay, good. I thought, just checking. All right, so because of that, the only way I know how to live this, any of this, is to stay inside only one day's worth of grace. That's the only way I know how to do this. So, and that means that you stop being a future tripper. You know, future tripping where you create imaginations in which God doesn't exist, so you are the only one that can control it. So you drag all those fears into your present and you control everybody in your world so that things you're afraid of that you fabricated out of nowhere don't happen. Right? I've been to my own funeral how many times? I was the only one to cry. You know, I've imagined every conversation and pretty much destroyed every relationship, so why even engage in that conversation? You know, I mean, it's all future tripping imaginations, everything that's not real. So your question helps me to say that in the sense that when I'm listening to someone, there's going to be a unique dynamic and a unique question that comes out of it. For her, it was, how did you end up on this flight next to me? Right? What's your story? And these different questions will come up. I noticed something. I was thinking about this, actually talking to some friends about this the other day.